Hello, my name's Al Horner, and this is Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. Each episode, a brilliant screenwriter revisits their first draft of what became a beloved movie or series. Our guest this week, well, I'm not actually sure where to begin describing his lengthy list of accomplishments. Eric Roth is the Academy Award-winning writer responsible for films like Forrest Gump, The Insider, Munich, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and 2018's A Star is Born. At 77 years old, Eric is as potent a storytelling force as ever. Last year, he delivered a sci-fi epic so huge, you'd have to have had your head buried pretty deep in the sand of a distant planet named Arrakis to have missed it. Yes, I'm talking, of course, about Dune, co-written with director Denis Villeneuve and previous Script Apart guest Jon Spaihts. The film kind of achieved the impossible. It translated one of the densest, most complex, and widely beloved sci-fi novels of all time into a thrilling blockbuster spectacle that somehow remained true to its source material. The film followed a young prince named Paul as an intergalactic battle erupted over control of his deadly, inhospitable planet. Frank Herbert wrote the book as a warning about society's tendency to give over every decision-making capacity to a charismatic leader. Eric, Jon, and Denis did a terrific job threading that insight into a chosen one story that challenges and interrogates that narrative template. In a captivating conversation, Eric told me all about the film's towering sense of scale and how that was achieved on the page. We talk about the opening that he originally envisioned for the movie that would have bankrupted the entire production had it gone ahead, and what keeps him hungry after all these years. Next on the docket for Eric is a collaboration with Martin Scorsese penning the upcoming Killers of the Flower Moon. So yeah, there's no slowing down for this veritable titan of the screenwriting universe. Getting to chat to Eric really was an experience to cherish. He is so full of screenwriting insight in this episode. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the conversation. A massive shout out before we dive into our Patreon supporters. We could not make this show without you. If you like what we do and would like to help us continue to grow, you can become a part of that Patreon community by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart, where you'll get ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and all sorts of bonus content coming very soon. We really do appreciate your support. Okay, that's enough of me talking. Let's get into it. This is the amazing Eric Roth talking about the first draft secrets of Dune. Thanks as ever for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Hey Eric, such a pleasure to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I'm really good. Actually, everything's good right today, yeah.
That's what I like to hear. Well, Eric, let's talk Dune. I absolutely adored this movie, a statement that's true of so many films that you've worked on across your 50 years in the business. I know that Denis had been dreaming of adapting Dune since he was about 14, but am I right in thinking your relationship with the novel was a little bit more complicated? Like, you'd grown up in that era, so you'd read Frank Herbert's novel, but you were never a fanboy from what I understand, and yeah, you had reservations about this being quite far removed from the more grounded types of stories that you typically tell.
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, I think it was an important book, but it wasn't my end-all be-all as a 15 or 16-year-old, as a lot of boys were. I mean, this book really defined a lot of young men, particularly men, I think. I don't know, maybe some women, but young boys really fell into this. It became their Bible of a certain kind. And it just wasn't mine that way. It doesn't mean that I didn't. I loved a lot of it. Some things I had a little less, interest in, but it was such a cultural phenomenon as part of my growing up that it was hard to ignore. And I mean, my science fiction bent was a little more Childhood Zen, which became 2001, The Foundation a little, which is a little more sort of organized in a more sort of different way, and also Ray Bradbury and stuff. But Frank Herbert was a little more fantasy, which it wasn't that I was against it. It wasn't the stuff that I gravitated to in the same exact way. But I did always feel this was a prodigious piece of work, so that, and I mean, with the glossary and the geography and, and then of course the prescience of the environmental impact and, and civilizations, tribalism and all the things that he was really, really sophisticated about. And he wrote it in a way that people could relate to it, So there was never any point that I didn't like the book. It just wasn't my, wasn't something, I wasn't catching the ride for me. Let's put it that way.
So when Denis kind of put the idea to you of kind of collaborating on it, what was it that pulled you in, given, as you say, like, this wasn't the be all and end all? Like, I read once that you're very laser focused when you write on theme. Like, unlike a lot of writers who kind of concentrate on telling the story and they just trust theme to kind of present itself in the work, you kind of really think about what the story is about.
Yeah, theme is what I think, it becomes a little ethereal in certain ways, but theme is what, because sometimes it's a little harder to define, but I think it's the more sort of, let's put it's God's hand in the thing, in other words, what is that creative process, and what is it this eventually about is what is important to me, so for me it was the responsibility of of being a prophet in a way. What does that mean? And I related it to, I've known a number of rock stars, and they have this terrible, it's a burden of a kind, and they love it, the charisma of it, the adulation, singing in front of 300,000 people. But on the other hand, people expect them to impart something to them to help sort of give answers to life. And a lot of these guys don't want that responsibility. It's very hard to burden, and it becomes corrosive in a lot of ways to them. And I think it's actually one of the, aside from, how drugs enter into things, in other words, in rock people's lives and obviously other people's, but this responsibility is very difficult. And so that was one of the things that I gravitated toward, Paul's character. What does that mean where you now have this responsibility of being somebody's idea of a savior in a kind of way, certainly a prophet. Yeah. And there's other themes in it, which are the ecological nature, which we just mentioned. To answer your question, I had done some rewriting on Arrival. And so I had a relationship with Denis, even though I had never met him. We had, he was in Budapest shooting Blade Runner 2049 when I did the work on Arrival, but we had we didn't Zoom then, it was just all phone conversation, maybe a little FaceTime. And then he asked me about doing this, which was, he liked my work, for various reasons. I was very aware of the David Lynch movie. I'd seen, I'm a big cinephile, so I know a lot of movies. And it wasn't my favorite movie ever made. I thought it was just different, a different approach. It was a little pop art to me, and I was very aware of Jodorowsky's, I knew El Topo, and I know his work really well. And I thought it was always interesting that he felt this was a dream of a kind, and Salvador Dali was going to be in it, the existential quality of it. And so I said, how do I approach this that it would interest this kind of guy, and also David Lynch? I mean, it's a very different artists. So Denis and I talked about it kind of at length about, what were the things that were interesting to him. And I reread the book, and I said, you know what, at first I didn't really want to do it. I didn't think it was my métier, if you want to say it that way. It wasn't something I felt maybe I could really do that great a job in. But then I started thinking about it, and I like challenges. So it's kind of daunting of a sort, but I said, this would be kind of interesting. And I then, I've told this before, but that when I approach any adaptation, if there's source material like a book particularly, I'll underline everything I think is cinematic or important dramatically. And I ended up like underlining almost the whole friggin' book, like 700 pages of it, whatever it is. And so then I had to sort of, let's grind down and see where we really are at. And then we started meeting Denis and I when I said yes, and they were kind enough to let me approach it. They needed out of me a few things. The state wanted a treatment as to what the first movie was going to encompass, and then what would the second movie encompass? Because we knew right away we were probably going to do two movies. What the interesting thing is they were debating about whether to shoot them at the same time, because you can save money that way, they probably, I think, I don't know how they would feel now, but it's such a risk that if you make the one movie, you make two movies and one of them is no good, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. You now made two. So I went to Denis and I said, yeah, okay, let's do this. I'm in, if and he's a wonderful visionary in his own way. He's a wonderful guy to work with. He lets you dream. He respects your be as imaginative as possible. He doesn't shoot down any ideas that way. But he also is very specific about that he wanted a feminine quality to the movie, that the females were very important to him. And so I like that. I mean, it's not that I hadn't thought about it, but not with the emphasis that maybe he had. And then, so with the Bene Gesserit and, the spiritual quality of the women in it and what their power and the power of the women. And then the sort of I don't know if this is really a fair description, but sort of the feminine aspect of the planet with the sand dunes and, things that one could ascribe being feminine. Doesn't mean that women have to be that way, but that there is a quality. So we agreed on that. So I said, I will certainly make that the foremost and as much as we can. And then he let me go in right pretty much. I mean, I'm saying we spent a number of, sessions together, and having, as people do creatively. And he let me go off and I delivered to him. Well, I'll go back. The state had approved the treatments, at least the first treatment. And they were quite happy because it just reflected the book, really. There wasn't anything I was going off reservation about. And so they were very happy. And we proceeded. And I wrote a very big, fat, probably overly long, but very imaginative version. Some emphasis to me because I had, how do I put this without being... Anyway, I know a lot about hallucinogenics or too much or something. And so I knew what that felt like. And I thought there was a quality to that about that with certain spiciness and that. And also, since he gave me permission to kind of dream, I really did dream kind of nothing far afield, but I mean, I always tell this story, and actually Denis told the other day in an interview we were doing that. I wrote the original opening of the movie was like Genesis from the Bible, and God created, and see the creation of a planet. We think it's Earth, and it's Dune, and with these oddball animals, and how the water went away, and how the sand dunes were formed, and all that, and it was pretty great, I think. But Denis said, "This is magnificent, but we can't afford the rest of the movie." So that was it. But I think he probably was right. It was pretty ambitious. And I'm ambitious that way. I don't mind, sort of bidding bold and going down, as they say in bridge. I don't mind trying things that might fail.
You've told a story before about kind of a critic once putting the notion to you that your films are kind of fundamentally about loneliness. And it sounded like you agreed with that to an extent. And I'm curious whether you feel you were able to sprinkle some of that loneliness into Dune. I mean,
I think I was with the boy. I think I was. Yeah, I think that there is even with, I think, and this is probably a little less obvious, but even with his father, the Duke Leto character that Oscar Isaacs plays so well, that I think there is this sort of man against environment about this, that there is a loneliness to it. And this boy is searching for a companion of a kind. I mean, so he has his mother, who's a wonderful, and he's also, don't forget, supposedly half Bene Gesserit. He has this, he's become this, he's the chosen one. So he has that, plus he's also human, right? So he has two sort of factors going on, which I think could be a lonely quality. I don't know. Some of the other movies are more, this was more, I stayed not slavish, but I was always aware of the book. So I didn't want to take big, swings away from the book. I think probably in other movies, the loneliness aspect of Forrest Gump or Benjamin Button. I mean, I can name other movies, even Munich. I mean, where I think you get a sense of my human look at feeling, what does it feel like to be alone, and what is mortality, all those things that are issues for me. And my work's gotten even probably more toward that. I've gotten older. Dune, I felt, I mean, this isn't a question you asked me, but I'll answer it. Dune, I felt had three obligations. One was not in any order of importance, but A was to the people who read the book and thought this was the next coming. In other words, that it meant that much to their lives. I didn't want to in any way take anything away from them and have them have hopefully a full meal out of that, and that it represented how they envisioned it. B would be the people who read the book and didn't remember it quite as well. It wasn't as important to them. It just was part of their development. And C were a whole generation of people who doesn't know what the hell this even is. I mean, it was like it's always comes to roost. The other night, I'm with my granddaughter who's 15 and Jordan by name, and she said, "Papa, I love that sweater you're wearing." I said, "Well, I'll just be honest with you. This sweater was given to me by Robert Redford when I was working with him. I was cold one day when we were working. He gave me the sweater. Said, keep it." And she said, "Who the hell is Robert Redford?" And I said, "All right, fair enough. Fair enough." So, I mean, I think we're on the edge of people of this generation, not their fault. This is when they were born, not knowing who the Beatles are. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be very careful about what your references are.
It's okay. She knows Zendaya, so.
So now, 100% she knew Zendaya. She also is a funny thing, and this is, I don't know if I should tell, it's kind of a Hollywood kind of story. So I said to her, who do you know that I work with? She said, Leonardo, right? Literally 2 minutes later, Leonardo texted me about something we were involved in, and I handed her the phone. Funny, huh?
That's pretty awesome.
It's true. I mean, but look, I'm an old man in that world, and I try to stay viable. I think it's one of the reasons I did Star is Born, to say I can still speak to this generation, that storytelling is about whoever you are, and whatever age you are.
Absolutely. So, we talked about the sort of Genesis opening that you obviously had to cut for budget reasons. Like, as you kind of first wrote a 50-page treatment and then wrote a 60-page treatment to present to the estate, were there other things in there that kind of like were cut? Were there kind of other avenues you explored?
No, it really, I think in the main, it followed the story. But I honestly don't. I mean, we had to make certain decisions on which. I mean, I think there were a couple characters we took out, and I don't know a chapter and verse anymore, But I think we stuck close to the book. I mean, I'll give you my history very quickly of this. So it's an interesting thing because it's a dynamic I haven't really experienced quite before. So I did my version, which was, I said, big fat, wonder version, maybe a little too much wonder. And then Denis and I had agreed early on, so I don't mind if somebody wants to put their hand in. In other words, he said, I'm going to maybe do some work on this after you. I said, God bless. I said, this is so huge. And I want you to be, I always feel the director has to know the movie better than I do. I don't care if I wrote an original, that at the end of the day, they may be their version of it and maybe not quite mine, but they have to know what movie they're going to sell. And so to tell. And so the Denis, I felt this is fine. He can run it through his typewriter, Sometimes I don't like that, but in this case, I had no problem. And he did a good job of making, cutting, editing, doing the things that I think directors are supposed to do. Just to give you an example, and we use this in Mank that I, for David Fincher, the idea that screenwriters are great craftsmen, can be great artists of a kind, and you build the ship for people and you put your details in and everything else, but the director's got to take it on its journey, and he's got to make it get to where he wants it to go. And I always say it's kind of a silly comment, but that if it barks like a dog, it's a director. It's going to sound like the director, what I'm saying, and look like the director and smell like the director, and it's going to be the directors. At the end of the day, it's the directors. It doesn't mean the words don't matter. It doesn't mean that you haven't made some giant sense of what this movie is. I think Denis would say that in a nice way, that I brought a original soul to the piece, that Frank Herbert had. I just had to bring it out. And then he did work on it, and then they still felt it needed some grounding. I was off to do work on Killers of the Flower Moon at that point. So they brought in a wonderful writer named Jon Spaihts, who came up with a great invention of switching the gender of the Dr. Kynes character.
That's right,
very smart, really smart. And so they asked me back. I did some more work. He came back on John. we never sat in a room, the three of us together, by the way. And I don't think I met John till after it, but it was an unusual experience for me because I've been rewritten, and believe me, it hurts. And I've rewritten people, and I'm sure it hurts whoever I've rewritten. But this was one of the most seamless, where it's really hard to tell who's, where it all sort of meshed without, we're all different personalities, different ideas of what was going to work. But I think Denis held it together like glue, so. I think the three names on there are accurate. I mean, that's who did this. Yeah.
One thing that's really striking about this adaptation is the degree to which you just let people kind of luxuriate in the world of Dune. There's no hand-holding or over-explaining. You kind of just unleash all these references to different tribes, places, people, religions, political factions throughout the first act, and you just trust the audience to pick it up from context and enjoy the ride.
I would differ only slightly this way, that I think we went a step further because I remember having to write narration and also to use that film thing they did to show visually what we're thinking, what he's talking about, Paul, with the planets. And so, yes, I mean, I think we had to look, one of the hardest part of writing as a screenwriter is exposition. Bad writers do "Good morning, Mr. Water Commissioner," right? So it's the morning, it's a water commissioner and somebody who's probably in a subservient role sometimes.
Yeah.
But you want to do that, you have to give that information, but you want to do it in such a way that you're not, sometimes you do it if you're a really good writer through metaphor or subtext, we call it. Or but beginning writers tend to tell you what they know and we should know. And rather than doing it in any way that slides it in so you get it, where you don't have to be just doing all storytelling. They do a lot of that. Sort of television will tell you all what you kind of see. But it was important, I think, to have some narration and then the visualization of that stuff, so that those who don't know the book or those who forgot the book will know, this is exactly what you're talking about. Who's who? It's like a scorecard. Yeah.
Yeah, considering, I believe the Lynch version, audiences were given glossaries as they entered screenings to kind of be able to track what was going on. And indeed, in the book, there's something called the Butlerian Jihad, I believe.
Right. I know, yeah.
There was obviously a decision made early on that it's going to bog down this already quite lengthy film, sort of explaining all this stuff. It'd probably be quite hard to do it in an overly elegant way. So it seems like you and Denis kind of opted for a light touch and trusted audiences.
I know we had to, ascribe certain things so you're not lost. Those who don't know the book, backwards and forwards. And but also where you're right is that I find the film kind of mesmerizing. So you kind of just so that he was able to capture something that felt hypnotic in a way about the planet, that you're just sort of imbued in this world that is going on around you in a way, and all of a sudden you're feeling part of it, And I thought he did a wonderful job doing that. It was a really good film. Yeah.
So to dive into the script a little bit, instead of the Genesis beginning, unfortunately, we begin on the planet Arrakis as seen from space. We track across its endless windswept terrain and glide into a low-hanging dark cloud that's generated by a massive mining vehicle, a harvester. We push through the spice, these glowing flecks, kind of orange flakes. And on the ground, we have these soldiers flanking the harvester, leading the industrial nightmare through the darkness. And it's then that we're given a glimpse of a small band of blue-eyed Fremen fighters taking cover behind a sprawling black rock, kind of fighting back against these colonizers. Is it just me, or was there a deliberate decision to kind of really foreground the Fremen and the oppression they're facing and their courage in the face of this tyranny?
Yes. I mean, I think, honestly, I think that you read, I think, is probably a combination of all three of us, maybe more Jon Spaihts, but I think they made a difference, because I even had a different scene then that opened it, which is in the movie, when the Harkonnen have to leave the planet. In other words, when they've been defeated. So that's, I think the new opening, maybe I'm wrong, maybe the opening. I have to think because it's been now a little while, and
Yeah.
also or it was maybe a dream that opened the thing with him and bad Timothy.
Yeah.
But I think that however that came about, I mean, it was from another, it was in another place, that exact scene of, however it was described. And they just, they made the decision to put it first, or Denis did. He may have done that, while they were filming the movie. I don't even know. And it's a good decision. I mean, I think it tells you what you need to know right away. And the Fremen, I mean, I love the Fremen because they're kind of a hippie culture in a way, from
Yeah.
a little bit from my era that way. And they're supposedly rebels, and they developed all these great things like the suits that they wear and everything to be able to fight this environment, which is pretty great, pretty great. So you always have them, and then the second movie is going to be free for all with them. It's going to be wonderful, really wonderful. Yeah.
And from that dream sequence, we're introduced to Paul, and there's this great interaction with his mother that achieves so much. Like in the space of 2 pages, we're introduced to the voice. We get kind of an insight into his relationship with his mother and to the weight on his shoulders. Like, your father wants you in full dress, his mother informs him, and that kind of gives us a sense of the person he feels burdened with becoming.
Yeah.
So who was Paul to you, Eric, and how did you find that character on the page?
Well, I think that scene is pretty much out of the book. I mean, that's pretty close to what you might have had a couple of lines to give you some, as I say, exposition about the father and all this, but those few scenes. But more important is what your question is. As I say, I wanted to begin with the burden on this kid the moment he woke up. You know what I'm saying? And we know what his dreams were like of a kind. And I also, was really important to me, and I guess the book did it, but maybe I don't remember anymore, about him being able to see the future. I don't know if that's the book or me. I don't remember anymore. Probably the book. Probably the book. I mean, I'm saying this because you get so involved in your work with the material. After a while, you don't know where you leave off and what you have coming into you from somebody else. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean I'm taking credit for something I didn't envision, but I don't know anymore. I'd have to go look.
Well, one thing that's definitely an invention of yours, or at least one of the 3 of you, there's this scene in which Paul and his father visit the grave of Leto's dad.
Yeah.
So, Leto listens to Paul's hesitancy about the leader he's supposed to become.
That's right.
He reveals, "I told my father I didn't want this either. My father said a good man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it." And he answers, "If you answer no, you'll still be the only thing I've ever needed you to be, my son."
Yeah, that was an early on thing, the graveyard scene, and I mean, I do like relationships between fathers and sons, and that was obviously very important in that, and particularly because he's all man in quotes, the father.
Yeah,
I mean, he doesn't have any other. He's not Bene Gesserit or anything. He has no genetic, except for half of his part of his DNA in this kid. But I think it's also, when you think about the tropes of, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, I mean, everybody has some descendancy, you know what I'm saying? So you are burdened by it, or it becomes something you have to either overcome, or it becomes a triumph for you. So that I knew, going in, was one of the things that you do in Joseph Campbell's myths, you know what I'm saying? That you need to have a myth that you're now going to debunk or fight after, so. But these things all, in their own way, I would say, except for classical mythology, which is a whole other conversation, is they stem from Star Wars, period. Basically, that's George was able to put that all into one body of work, amazing.
While being inspired by Dune. So
yes, absolutely. But yeah, no, I know, but he was able to create his own universe,
Absolutely.
And that's so hard. I mean, it's like really amazing. So I guess hats off to Frank Herbert too, obviously, that he can create this amazing universe.
And in terms of Leto's fate in this film, I think that hits harder, his death later on in the movie, because of the kindness that he showed his son here. Like that line, "You'll still be the only thing I've ever needed you to be, my son."
And one of the things that's interesting in the book and the movie is that it slightly breaks drama law because you assume the father's going to die way, deep into the movie. I'm saying if you're aware of the father's going to die, that you would use that as a giant dramatic jumping off point. And it is hugely dramatic, and it's obviously so important, but that happens a little prior to where you might think of this as a catharsis. You know what I'm saying? And so that it's really interesting because I think he imagined a continuation of these things. That the kid has to now. I mean, movie 1 to me is about him becoming a man, and movie 2 is about him becoming, if he can, a prophet. So that's where we'll see.
And 20 pages in, after teasing Paul's power and premonitions, and after establishing, the new planet that Leto's been instructed to take over, Arrakis, we're finally introduced to the Baron, and the script reads, his deep resonant voice emerges from the steam. He is mountainous, 600 pounds of soft naked flesh. In the book, he's grotesque. Here he's grotesque, but there's an even darker quality to him in the book. Like, he lusts after a young nephew.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that was rough stuff.
So was it just too rough? You made the decision to kind
think
of...
that I don't remember in my version. I think it was too rough for me too. I mean, in other words, I think, look, the villains in these pieces, Darth Vader, you can name them all. They make the movie as much as anything else. In other words, the Superman movies, the Batman movies, the Joker. I mean, whoever it is, the movie is I think the propulsion of the movie is because of them. So that this was, and to make him, a pederast that way, I'm not so sure that would you ever recover from that. So I get it in the book, and I get that he's, voracious for everything, which is the whole idea of this giant, big, huge man, in this tub, and it reminded me a little bit of Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando had that kind of huge character.
I was going to ask if that was an influence.
In the bald head, and all that stuff. So, I think we tempered some of that. I'm trying to think. There was nothing. I mean, I think he was a little hard to write because you don't want to make him some oddball cliche, in other words. But I think Skarsgård did a great job, and it was like it was a hard character to write, as to, because you don't want to make him just pure evil, because that's fine, but it's not very sophisticated, So I think this kind of this representation of evil, if such things, something like that exists. I thought he did a wonderful job, Denis. I thought he really made it feel that way. Yeah.
And in terms of delivering on another thing that the novel was famous for, the sandworm scenes, they're so much fun to watch. Obviously, if you have any kind of knowledge of the books, you're kind of aware they're coming. You're anticipating them, and it's so satisfying the way they've been depicted on screen. It seems like they were really fun to write. Like, the description in the shooting script is, the worm erupts, swallowing the entire space crawler in a gulp, its cavernous maw rising out of the desert like a nightmare. Were these sequences as fun to write as they are to watch?
Yeah, they weren't that difficult because you need to have the tension of when they're going to appear. How much do we see of them? That's the trick, that you don't want to see it all. And, you want to sort of hold it for the last shot of the movie in a way, and that's what that's what we did. That was not as difficult to write. It was a little bit difficult, sort of the schematics of what was going to happen, and what we see. And it was a little tricky, the scene, like, when they have to extract the people because the sandworms are coming, but that was more about choreography than anything else. I mean, so that but yeah, the sandworms, it's wonderful because they're such a vital part of the thing, and it's like the great sort of the great beast. I mean, it's like the great TV show, with the dragon. That's always going to become the symbol, and that sandworm was completely.
And that obviously offers so much spectacle, as does the kind of like nighttime raid. But then to kind of like end the film, the book has this really natural sort of like halfway point that if you're splitting this story in two, that's a good place to leave it. Were there kind of challenges in ending on this much more intimate fight sequence, the duel, and sort of finding a way to make it feel climactic, despite the fact we've just had these enormous scenes of bombast?
Well, I mean, completely honest, I went further.
Did you?
So yeah, I did. My instinct was a little different than Denis. I mean, I can't fault what he did, because I think I like the fact the curtain just drops, kind of, and then you're ready. Well, when do I get my next movie? Which is not stupid, but I think he felt we had told the story about him becoming a man particularly with that fight. I had gone a little bit further, where we see some. I mean, I don't want to reveal what happens necessarily, but where we get a little bit more into the Fremen culture and his involvement with Chani, whatever her name is, Chani. But it wasn't much. I mean, it was maybe another 5 minutes, at the most, another 5 pages or something. But this is where he felt, looking at the movie, that he wanted to end things, and I think it works. I felt great. I loved it when the movie was over. In that way, I said, yeah, I'm ready for part two, and the adventure continue.
You and me both. But here's a question that maybe I wouldn't have thought to ask a few weeks, but unfortunately, depressingly, it is a relevant question to ask now. What do you think this story expresses about the nature of war, of empire, and of like military occupation that rings so true? Are there kind of contemporary echoes that kind of feel resonant in the story of Dune?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certainly contemporary echoes, but there've been echoes, I think, throughout human history. I mean, you're fighting over dirt. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to get down to the basics, I'm not talking about now philosophically about democracy and all those things. Of course, you should fight over. And obviously, it's just tragic what's going on. An echo again of World War II and everything. Really, I don't understand it myself, and I'm not stupid. But the inhumanity, and I think that's always been true. And why not in another world? I mean. I'll tell you, I just used this the other day, but Francis Coppola and I were talking while I was working for him on something, and we were talking about him doing a science fiction thing, in other worlds. And he said, look, it's all about the story. He said, if you're not gonna have a good story, then people are gonna be watching the chandelier. He was using a metaphor, but that's true. Because in other words, if you're not engaged and it doesn't represent real life things that you're ending up just watching, the skies for a spacecraft or something, and it's not enough. I mean, so no matter what story you're telling, you need to have the story has to, be foremost, and for me, theme on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, it was prescient of him with, I think, the tribal natures of things, that somehow man can't get away from. Believing that might's going to be right, that kind of stuff, So, yeah, I mean, that's evident in part of it, and you can go to that, or you could go to Bob Dylan singing Masters of War. I mean, in other words, same era, what I'm saying, and same, but I think that happens, unfortunately, over how many generations, how many wars have there been? So, and they're all about the same thing mostly, don't you think? They're about religion, or they're about power, or they're about philosophy, and most of them are about hatred,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of our Patreon supporters, Chris Wade, had a great question. He wondered, did you ever think Dune might work as a mini-series rather than a film? And, well, as someone who kind of helped lead the current TV streaming prestige series boom with your work on House of Cards, Eric, I'm definitely curious to hear your perspective on this one.
I think they either are planning, or they don't have yet. I don't think. You probably know better than I think they're gonna have a Dune TV series.
Yeah, I know Jon was working on it for a while.
They know more about that than I don't know that much about it. Yeah, certainly anything in a way could be but I think I mean, it's a longer conversation. It's a great question, by the way, but I have mixed feelings about House of Cards. I love the show. I love doing it with David. I mean, we did, we created this. Not obviously, it was created by the wonderful writer, and I had actually known about it for a while, that Michael Mann and Al Pacino were going to do it as a movie, because it's just Richard III,
Yeah.
just anyhow. It's like a guy stands outside a room, a powerful guy, and he says, "Watch me go in this room and fuck these people," and that's what it was. So it when it was purchased, I was more in favor of actually selling it at that point in time, and to HBO, because I was interested in sort of water cooler conversation, and just each week it would roll itself out. And David said, "No, you're being short-sighted. You're being a Luddite, and you're missing what is a bigger world here, where there's plenty of eyeballs to see this. And if they start eating it up, which they did with the binging, you're going to create a new universe." And I think it's great. And look, I watch things on my phone like anybody else, but I was born watching movies on. I went to the Brooklyn Paramount Theater and sat in the balcony as I was 7 years old and watched War of the Worlds, and this giant screen. And there was lights on the ceiling. It was supposed to make you feel like you were in at night, and stars outside. And it was like, what an experience. So I miss that. And I'll miss it, but there are trade-offs. So I think sometimes I'm so happy this was supposed to be a theatrical experience, and I would recommend anybody who still wants to see it to go see it in IMAX. Look, it was streamed then. So you ended up sort of a hybrid of what this gentleman's asking about.
Still, despite it being day and date, did do really well at the box office. It also, as we mentioned at the top of the show, scored you another Oscar nomination, your 6th Best Adapted Screenplay nomination. Ivan Marko, another of our Patreon supporters, was wondering if you had any insights as to what it is that makes you so successful in this category. Like, there's evidently an art to adaptation. Is there a particular philosophy that guides you when it comes to translating novels to screen?
Well, I guess it's, they're not all novels.
Yeah.
The Insider was from a magazine article. I could start name them, and in some cases, I won't name which ones. The books weren't very good, so sometimes bad books make good movies. Bad plays do too. But I don't ever look at it as adaptation in a way. I always look at it as original writing that I'm blessed to have being given, like Benjamin Button behind me in my room here.
Yeah.
Because I just love that movie, even though I think there's things we could talk about. But that was just a single idea, but I didn't have the idea. F. Scott Fitzgerald did, a far better writer than I'll ever be. But the article, the short story he wrote isn't very good, to be honest with you. It's in Collier's. He did it for the money. He threw it off. So I had permission to then go invent, you know what I'm saying, from that point. But you have to invent a guy who's aging backwards, and that was his idea. But what story are you telling? So that's always what I love. You're challenged with what, and then you have to decide what you're going to use from the material that's there. You can't, to answer his question, you can't do the whole book. You can't do a man's life, for instance, in a movie. You have to, as Fincher actually said, you have to only give the impression of a man's life. Citizen Kane is 2.5 hours, 2 hours 20 minutes. That's all you're getting. You're not getting hours upon hours. Even if you have a big miniseries or a long running show, you can't cover 30 years. You can cover it, but you won't live 30 years to see it. You know what I'm saying? So you have to dramatize things. So that's my job. I'm a dramatist, at that heart. And if I'm good, I think I'm good at humanizing things. I think I can make people feel human and that you recognize them.
And we've been teasing it across, the duration of this conversation, Eric. Dune Part 2 has now, of course, been officially greenlit. So are you getting the band back together with Jon and Denis for this sequel?
I'll be just dead frank honest. I'm 76 years old. I said to Denis, and I said to the people who pay for these things, I have other worlds to conquer. And so I know Denis working on it, and I don't know if Jon is or not. I hope he is, because it's important to him, and he's a wonderful writer. I'm sure they'll utilize him in whatever way they are. And I have a feeling somewhere along the road they'll probably call me and say, "Would you take a look at this? What do you think?" And but I did Killers of the Flower Moon that Marty Scorsese made with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's an amazing movie from the script and what Marty shot. and I think it'll be something really special. And I have another movie it looks like it's going to get made, and another thing I just finished. So I mean, I'm trying to, without sounding bleak, but I'm trying to maximize my time on this planet to be able to do whatever work I can do and the best I can do. And it wasn't, I would have gone back to Dune, I guess, but I think I've been there, so that doesn't mean they can't create wonderful new things, and I'm sure they will, so it's just, they didn't need Eric Roth necessarily.
And in terms of those, I love the phrase, there are worlds still left for you to conquer. What are those worlds, Eric? I know you have lots of projects in the offing at the minute, and some of them you'll be able to talk about, some of them you won't. But in terms of like your remaining white whales, the things you haven't done, the directors you haven't yet worked with, considering you've worked with everyone from Kurosawa to Spielberg and now Scorsese, what are these worlds left to conquer after 50 years of doing what you do?
Well, I think it's all about what the subject matter is. I'm interested in a thing that Leonardo and I, a couple things we're talking about pretty seriously. One is, I'd say, about the environment in its own way, but there's a great story, I think, to it, which surprises you when it becomes about the environment. And then we have a look at some American culture we're very interested in. I'm just a little behind on Cher. I'm doing Cher's biography.
Wow, I didn't know that.
We're good friends, yeah. And I have a really different way to do it. We'll see. I could strike out big time. I did a love story for Netflix. I literally turned in yesterday that I think is pretty spectacular. Very, very. I guess if you want to harken back to an older movie, The Way We Were, in a way, it's a modern romance. So I can't talk much about it, but I've done a project with Bob Zemeckis and Tom Hanks that we finished, and I can't say much more about it, but it's pretty special.
I thought you guys were doing a graphic novel or something. Is that the thing I'm thinking of?
That's right. That's exactly. It's done. Yeah.
Excellent.
Done. Yeah.
Well, that's a lovely place to leave things, Eric. This has been so much fun. And
anytime. I love talking about what I do. It's like, how blessed am I?
Yeah. I mean, well, from what I hear, it's every morning up at 8 on this old computer system that doesn't have email access or an internet connection.
No email. You can't steal it.
Maybe that's the tactic I need to take, and then I can be as prolific as you.
No, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody. I'm just used to it, but it only has 40 pages of memory, and you have to end your 40 pages or it's going to disappear, the whole damn thing. And I'm petrified the thing's going to at some point just collapse, So, but somehow it keeps working and ticking away. So we'll see.
Eric, this has been so great. Thank you so much for your time today. Hope to speak soon.
It's great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.